everyone, I'm Melissa from Knitting the Stash, and this is episode 147 in the series. Welcome back to the yarn room. I know I have been away for a little while. I'm excited to hang out with y'all again here, and I'm calling this episode changes. So lots of different changes happening around here for summer in terms of knitting, in terms of website stuff, in terms of teaching. All kinds of wonderful different changes are happening, so we'll talk about most of those. I also have a finished object here. This is the Byron sweater by Natasja Hornsby for Spencer. He is not here to model it because he is out there chopping wood, which is something we've been doing as a new summer activity for the last couple of weeks, so I might talk about that. And we have been away. We took a trip out west to go visit the grandkids and do a little hiking, so I'll talk a little bit about that trip. It was interesting to say the least, and we'll talk about the finished object. And then I have tons of sweaters on the needles or just off the needles, or it's really weird. I'm usually a monogamous knitter, but I have a lot of different things going on at once. Again, changes. So we'll talk about that a little bit. And for those of you who are brand new, welcome. This is typically a podcast about sweater garment design and modification especially. I like to knit sweaters. I like to modify my sweaters, and that is what I primarily talk about, though I do knit a lot of other things. And if you are coming back, welcome back. It's so nice to see you. It's been a while, and I've missed all of the Saturday Zooms, so I'm looking forward to catching up with y'all. I think you all have been continuing in my absence, so I've got to catch up with the group maybe next week and see what's going on. If you're interested in the Saturday Zoom, let me know. Send me an email at knittingthestash@gmail.com. And what else do I tell you at the beginning? I tell you where you can find me, which is I'm Knitting the Stash just about everywhere. So obviously here on YouTube, over on Ravelry, on Instagram, and on the main website, which is knittingthestash.com. And that's where you can find the Flock Farm Yarn Shop. And lately I've been selling a lot of fiber. You guys like the fiber from these small indie producers in the US, so I will try to keep that coming and source some more for you. Over on the website, knittingthestash.com, you can also find all of my classes and links to tutorials and things like that. And one of the big changes to the website is that I am now hosting all of my own online classes. I'm not using a secondary platform for that. So if you go to the website, you'll now be able to purchase classes directly from me, from my platform. And what I've done is basically set classes up on YouTube via like private playlists. So when you buy a class, you get the private playlist link, and you get all the class materials, which are any handouts, worksheets, any kind of helpful resources, things like that, plus patterns and whatever goes with the class. So all 4 of my classes now are up on YouTube. I have a free reading a sweater pattern class. Like I said, if you're new, we do a lot of sweaters around here. I have a beginning modification class. So if you're just starting to knit garments and you want to figure out how to modify them, I have a beginning modification class. Then I have a creative modification class. So that goes beyond like fit and measurements and the kind of standard, like I want to increase my arm length, or I need to change the bust size, or what about the gauge questions, and goes into some pretty fun, interesting ways of creatively modifying patterns. So things like mashing up patterns or re-engineering them, all that kind of fun stuff is in my creative modification class. And then I also have a sweater cloning class. So if you have a sweater in your closet from like your mom or your grandma, or something you found at the Salvation Army, or a picture that you snapped out in the wild, and you want to recreate that sweater, that class is for you. That one is all about how to read the sweater for details about its construction, and then write up your own pattern so that you can create that garment in your own size and your own style with your own modifications. So those are 4 big classes that I do offer. They're no longer on Teachable. They are only on YouTube, so I can control all of the bits and bobs of the classes, which makes me really happy. And part of the reason for that is Teachable made some changes, and you all know I don't like to speak ill of any company or people on here if at all possible, but Teachable really disappointed me, and in a pretty major way. So I'll just leave it at that. They changed all of their policies and prices and all that kind of stuff, making it pretty impossible for a lot of us small businesses to stay on that platform. So I'm really happy. It gave me the kind of push to get everything over on YouTube. So the classes are available. If you were a former Teachable student, you should have received emails with access codes to all of the classes that you're enrolled in. If you haven't, let me know. Send me an email at knittingthestash@gmail.com and I will get you all set with your class materials and with your links to the YouTube playlists. And if you're interested in taking one of those classes, you can go sign up directly via my website, and that way you are taking a class directly from a platform that I am like working, was able to create for myself, and there's no middleman, and it's just, I think it's a kind of a cool system. So I hope you'll come take a class with me. I am offering 15% off right now with the code Summer School. So if you want to try one of those classes for 15% off, head over to my website and use the code Summer School to enroll. Yeah. So all of those changes have been, making the summer kind of interesting for us. Like I said, we just got back from a trip. We are normally pretty much like low-key tripsters. Like we would take a car or a van or something and just head out west and, sleep in a tent or maybe stay in a hotel 1 or 2 times, but then go backpacking. This time we decided to take an RV, which was not us at all, like not our MO. And it was a curious experience. It was like a mixed bag of like good and weird. So it was nice to just always have like your home on your back, kind of like a turtle. And we went all the way from New York to Washington State, so across the country, which was pretty wild. And it was great. We could have lunch at a rest stop, just in the trailer, and we could stop over at different places. Like I think we stopped at Wall Drug one night, which is the famous place in South Dakota. They had a little parking lot in the back. So that part was interesting. Not so interesting was the incredibly cold weather we had. Weird cold weather. Really cold. We didn't have any heat in the RV, and we were up in the mountains a lot of the time, or higher altitudes, and it was getting down to like 30 degrees at night, so it was cold. And then on the way back we had no air conditioning in the truck, so it was a little bit of a physically challenging trip, and it was weird because we had this RV. But it was also kind of fun. We got to see the grandkids, and one of the projects that I am going to be working on in the next couple weeks is for our little granddaughter, so that's kind of exciting. She and I talked all about it, so I told her I'd make her a sweater and I will be sending it to her in the mail. And I was able to knit in the truck part of the time. We did have the windows open and the air blasting because of the lack of air conditioning, so it was a little bit of a challenge for knitting. But I was knitting on this sweater, and I've been working on a kind of secret test knit for Albina McLaughlin. So that sweater is also on the needles, and I have a blanket on the needles, and I'm about to cast on 2 other sweaters. So it's weird for me. I'm usually the monogamous knitter who finishes like one project at a time. So I don't know, maybe the summer bug got me. So things are happening. We did get to do a little bit of backpacking out in the Beartooth Wilderness, which we love, and we tried a new trailhead, which wasn't so good. We have a few trailheads that we really love because they're at high altitude and you can just walk right into the high country. We chose a lower altitude trailhead, and it was a lot of woods and mosquitoes and whatnot, even this time of year. So that was also a little bit challenging. Normally in the high country, no mosquitoes. It's pretty great, especially early in June. There's lots of snow, no mosquitoes. But we kind of missed that because we were in the woods most of the time. Anyway, like I said, that trip was a little bit wild. We've also been splitting out a lot of wood because it is already June, July, and we've got to get all our wood under cover for the winter. We have a wood boiler out there. This is going to be our 2nd year with the wood boiler. My husband Spencer has put up a couple different videos about our wood boiler system, which is wonderful and very, very hot, but we do have to chop up all the wood, so we've been working on that. And tons of other little house projects, our garden and things like that, all the wonderful things you do in summer, right? So let me get to the knitting. It's been a while. I wanted to give you a life update for those of you who are coming back, but I also have the knitting update. So let's talk about this sweater, which is the Byron sweater by Natasja Hornby, and I believe the last time you all saw this sweater, I showed you a swatch, and then it might have been in the bolero stage. Like we might have had just to the armpits and Spencer tried it on, something like that. And he isn't here to try it on today because he's out chopping wood. But this is the finished version of that sweater, and I put it on my regular mannequin, so it looks a little bit large on the mannequin. As far as fit goes, I want to say Spencer's happy. It fits. It's just a little bit looser than I had anticipated or intended as a knitter. So part of my story about this sweater is like competing expectations. So Spencer's happy with it. He wants to wear it under the bus and, you know, under the tractor and do all of his stuff in it. But as a knitter, you know, when you've made a lot of sweaters, you just start, you know, like critically analyzing everything and thinking to yourself, oh, I could have done that just a little bit better. So that's what the story of the sweater really is. So for all of you knitters out there who are making sweaters for other people or making them for yourself, and you find that the finished object is not exactly what you had imagined, this is the podcast episode for you. And it's kind of like how to deal with those expectations. So on the one hand, Spencer puts it on, he's happy with it, even though it's not what he had originally totally requested, because he wanted something that was a little more form-fitting. This is actually has some ease to it. So on the one hand, it's not what he expected, but he likes it. And on the other hand, it's not what I had intended, even though it looks great and works just fine as a sweater. So as a knitter, there are a few things about this sweater that I almost want to do what I've done with other sweaters, which is to go back and re-knit the whole thing. Not take it apart, but get the yarn again and re-knit it, either in this gauge, but a size down in the pattern, or in a slightly tighter gauge, and also maybe tighter gauge and also a step down in the pattern, something like that. Anyway, I haven't gone through all of it in my mind yet. I've just been thinking a lot about it. So it is a top-down sweater, so you can try it on as you go, and we did that, and everything was looking pretty good as he was trying it on. And in the end, what I think changed about this sweater that made it just slightly large, like slightly had a little more ease than I expected, is the way that this pattern, this all over broken seed stitch, excuse me, kind of opened up once it was washed. So my gauge swatch, it lied to me, which gauge swatches can do, because my gauge swatch was pretty small. It was probably about 6 inches, and it didn't, take into account the kind of weight or fully the drape of what this fabric might look like in a larger piece of fabric. So I know I'm a big advocate of gauge swatching, and I still say gauge is good, gauge swatching is good, but it can also be a little bit deceptive. And sometimes when I have made sweaters that didn't turn out quite as I had imagined them, what I want to do as a knitter is re-knit them almost immediately, because then I feel like I can understand I understand the fabric now and how it behaves, and then I can take that knowledge and apply it to the sweater pattern and the potential modifications I might make. So I'd be curious to know if anyone else is like that, right? If you knit a sweater and you're like, if it's perfect, it's fine. But if it's slightly off from what you imagined, knitting it again immediately just to get, part of it's getting over it, I think, like wanting to understand and have knowledge and apply that knowledge in a certain kind of way, but also it's like maybe it's like a grieving process. I don't know, like this didn't turn out exactly as I intended it. And so what I want to do is make it right in my mind. So I kind of want to re-knit the whole thing. Not take it apart, just get some new yarn and re-knit it, because I want to make it work. I want to figure out how to make it work exactly as I intended it, if that makes sense. So things that happened with the gauge, it's a little bit longer than I anticipated, and that's no problem because there's just some rib at the bottom and I can pop that off and shrink it up for Spencer, but he doesn't seem to care. These are things for me. It came out about 1/2 inch too long, maybe 1 inch. So that's an easy fix. I think the armpit ended up being just a tad too long, again, maybe 1/2 inch to 1 inch. And what I would do there is I already split when I was doing my mods. Sorry, Tinky's over on the couch making noise. When I was doing my mods, I already split for the, split the arms off the body early, and just instinctually, like, this isn't working, it needs to be shorter. So I did that already. I would just do it a little bit sooner. And it fits on the shoulders really well. The arm length, again, this relaxed very much vertically. So I might pop off the cuffs and come up just a little bit with that. But then overall, it has just about, I think maybe 1 inch or 2 of too much, to my mind, too much ease. So one of the things that would be interesting to do is to actually measure the gauge here Like you get a huge gauge swatch now. Measure the gauge here, make some decisions about not only stitch gauge, but row gauge as well. And then go back to the drawing board with the pattern and think about possible modifications to make it work out perfectly. Things that I love about this sweater, I really think this pattern is kind of cool. And this is actually modified. This was modified by someone else. Like I said, I'll put the link here to the Ravelry whose project I was pretty much copycatting. But they pretty much just changed this pattern, and I like what they did here. So they added another color in. So you have the lighter contrast color, the kind of gold contrast color, and then the two background colors, the blue and the green, running through this. And they changed the number of repeats of the different rows and things like that. So I thought that was kind of fun. The other thing that's cool about this sweater is that this looks like complicated color work, but it's just slip stitches. So even if you're new to knitting and you're interested in knitting this pattern, broken seed is really easy to do. Broken seed is just seed stitch, which is knit, purl, knit, purl, knit, purl, and then purl, knit, purl, knit, purl, knit, right at the reverse, broken with a line of stockinette. And she chose to break the stockinette with that line of stockinette with like two different colors. That's why you get the broken seed stitch in two colors. It's really cool. And then up here, this is just slip stitches. So there's not actually, you're never holding more than one color at a time for any part of the sweater. So if you're interested in trying out a sweater that ends up looking like really complicated, beautiful fabric, but you kind of want to experiment with a few things like broken seed stitch or some slip stitching, yeah, this is a great sweater for that. She also has a nice compound raglan shaping to the shoulders, so it sits really well on Spencer's shoulders, and I think that all of the details of the design are pretty nicely done in her pattern. She writes good patterns. The only caveat I'd have here is that this particular pattern, one of the reasons I had to modify it, is that it has limited sizing, in part because of this broken seed stitch business and needing to, do decreases and things like that, or increases for the top down portion of the yoke. So there's limited sizing in that it's not every couple inches, it's like every 4 inches. So if you want a half size, you have to do the work, and that's what I was trying to do with this version, with a weird gauge and a different yarn. Anyway, so that's my only con of the pattern, is that the sizing isn't every couple of inches. It's like every 4 inches. So you kind of have to either size it up like I did or size it down and then see what happens. But I really do think it's a beautiful sweater. I like how the apparent color work kind of continues through the sleeves. Yeah, it's just a nice sweater. And I feel like I've talked about it on a couple other episodes when Spencer was on here and when I was talking about the gauge. So yeah, I don't feel like I need to go into too many more details about it. What I would say is that I recommend the yarn. This is, let me see if I can grab a tag. This was yarn from New Zealand. I think, again, I talked about it on here before. It's Southlander Sport. It's a 5-ply sport weight yarn from New Zealand by a company called Skeins. It's their own yarn they make. I've recommended it to a few friends at this point. Totally reasonable in terms of cost, in part probably because they have so much yarn and so many sheep in New Zealand. It's not, some fancy merino or anything like that. It's like a medium, feels like a medium kind of grade wool. It's a blend of something. They don't really say exactly what it is. It's not like a merino. It's some kind of mix of New Zealand sheep of one kind or another. Lots of colors available. It's a very lightweight yarn. So one of the reasons that my gauge was off from the pattern, I mentioned this before probably, is that Spencer runs pretty hot. So the original pattern calls for a wool yarn and an alpaca yarn held double, which was going to be so hot for Spencer. So we went with this New Zealand just wool. It feels like it's maybe semi woolen spun. It's not a worsted spun yarn. It's a very light sweater. And you can see that my gauge is very, very loose, which I would not normally do for a sweater. But because Spencer runs hot, I wanted to make sure that the sweater would be a little more airy. That's why we chose this yarn. All complexities aside. But one of the cool things about this sweater that I forgot to mention is that because it has such a busy kind of all over pattern, you don't even notice that the gauge is so loose. right? Because when you just see the fabric, it's not transparent or translucent in any kind of way because it's just got so much going on. So that's one of the reasons I was able to knit in such a loose gauge, was because of this broken seed stitch pattern all over the sweater. So yeah, so I would recommend the Southlander Sport. Lots of different colors, fun to work with, doesn't split, anything like that, and just know that it does relax. It relaxes a little bit more than you might anticipate. So like I said, I think I was going for 4 inches of ease overall, and I think I ended up with 6 inches of ease. So it really did relax in, like, when it was in bigger pieces than just like my little swatch, which I don't even know if I have anymore. Oh yeah, here it is. So here's my little swatch, and I did it in the round and everything, trying to be like a good knitter. It's a very small swatch, and this just doesn't behave like this. You know, you can see that it's a much more tightly knit kind of gauge. Like it's a little stiffer. So this compared to this, it's like night and day. So with this yarn, I would definitely recommend swatching a big old swatch and seeing what you get, because that is going to make a big difference in that final ease of your sweater. As always, you know these things. I'm a broken record. But it's done. It's done. This one took a long time because of that broken seed stitch. And I'm really glad to have it off the needle. So this talk of me knitting it again, I don't know if I will. It's like a problematic in my mind that I want to kind of work out. Anyway, I'd love to know if you've had a similar situation with a sweater. Now, what else is on the needles? I've told you I have a secret test knit for Albina McLaughlin, which is funny because the design is kind of based on a sweater that my second sweater. So she and I have known each other for a long time now. And she's kind of working up a design for what was my second sweater, which was kind of like, I made it up from a bunch of different ideas. So we'll see. It's looking really good. It's really an interesting sweater. It has a beautiful shawl collar, lots of fun things like that. I'm knitting my version in Brooklyn tweed. She's knitting her version in shorn. So I'm like, oh, just super excited. If you have been around here long enough, you know that I produce a yarn every year called shorn, and this sweater is knit up in this yarn shorn 2 and shorn 4 were really the same. And that's what she knit hers in. And it's just this beautiful gray, and I'm in love with it, and I might have to make a version in shorn once I'm done with my Brooklyn tweed version. Anyway, that's on the needles. I still have my Lunenburg sweater all ready to go. It's in the bag over there. I'm knitting it in lichen and lace, and I just haven't had a chance to even wind up the skeins yet, so I'm looking forward to that. And as I said, I hung out with the grandkids, and the oldest of the grandkids is 4 years old, and she arrived at our parking spot at our RV park, which was this beautiful, we stayed out in Spokane, and it was this beautiful, like it was on a little lake, and we were the only people parked on this one side, so we had the whole like shore to ourselves, and she showed up in beautiful rainbow everything. So she had on like a rainbow, not quite rainbow, but like lots of different eclectic colors. Like she really loves different colors. So we got to talking. She's 4, and I said, she liked my sweater, and I said, well, I like to knit sweaters, and it looks like you like rainbows. Would you like a rainbow sweater? And she was just like, her eyes lit up. So I thought to myself, okay, we have to knit the rainbow sweater. And I promised her mom that it would follow through. So, but I also told, the little 4-year-old, like, okay, it's not like time with 4-year-olds is really interesting. So I was like, it's not like I can just produce a sweater and like, it's going to show up tomorrow. So I was like, it's going to be in the mail. It'll be like a special surprise. It'll come later, trying to like work this out. So when I got home, I immediately started looking for patterns. And I want to make like a 4 to 6 year old kind of size so she can still grow into it a little bit. And rainbows. Now I found in my search, you can do anything you want with these kinds of sweaters. Like you can usually just take any kid's sweater and put stripes on it. That would be perfectly acceptable. But I just kind of wanted to find a sweater pattern that was actually intended for, being a rainbow sweater. And so I found Tanis Lavalier of Tanis Fiber Arts just put out, I can't remember the name of the sweater. I'll put it on the screen. It's a beautiful broadly striped sweater, crew neck. I think it's knit from the I can't remember. I think it might be bottom up. But it's in pieces. So you do the back and the front and the two sleeves separately, and then you seam them all up. And that way you can do all kinds of things with it, including add lots of stripes. So Tanis Fiber Arts is closed down for the summer. They're taking their summer vacation right now, so I couldn't go get Tanis Fiber Arts yarn, which I do love. Her yarn is beautiful. So I went to Knit Picks because I was trying to find a yarn that was going to be more washable for grandkids. You know, like there are 3 grandkids already, and I don't want Aaron to have to be hand washing sweaters because it just seems like an extra burden. So I found a DK weight superwash yarn in multiple colors. It's called Swish DK, I think, and many of you might have already been knitting something in this. So I ordered a bunch of different colors for that, so that'll be the rainbow sweater. But I also had Spencer sent this from Amazon, and it is this kit. It's kind of like a color, I think it's like a crochet kit or a color kit. This is like, it's all acrylic yarn, and you guys know that I don't usually use a lot of superwash or acrylic, but it has its place. So this is all acrylic yarn in tons of different rainbow colors, and I kind of think this might also be good for something for the little 4-year-old. So if not the sweater itself, then maybe a little toy or a little rainbow something else to go with the sweater, maybe a rainbow hat, something like that. This is, I believe this is a worsted weight, though it doesn't really say on here. Yeah, it doesn't really say. It looks worsted to me, and the pattern that I picked is DK, so that's the reason I didn't use it. But it looks like a pretty interesting little kit of yarn if you were doing toys or, like I said, little hats or something like that. So I'll put a link to this down in the show notes if anybody else is interested. Like I said, Spencer got this for me. Thought I would have some fun playing around with it, and I will. But if you're looking for just kind of like a big bag of fun colored yarn, this looks like a lot of fun. So I immediately thought of this, but since the pattern I picked is DK and this is worsted, not for the sweater. Plus, I kind of wanted to have a sweater that's made out of wool, even if it's superwash wool, because it'll be a little warmer. They're up in Washington State. It gets cold in the winters, and it'll still be machine washable as long as it doesn't get dried. So we'll see. But I'm curious to like do some more knitting with this stuff, especially for the grandkids. I love making them little toys. So that might be something else to cast on. Yeah. And in the off hours, when I'm not thinking about knitting or traveling around in an RV or splitting wood, I am working on the next chapter of the book. For those of you who have been following the book saga, it is a book about wool, of course, and technology and chemistry and all kinds of fun things like that. And the chapter I'm working on is actually on superwash yarn. So when I bought superwash yarn, all I could think of was all the research I had done about superwash yarn. So fascinating stuff. And maybe I'll be able to talk about it on here once things are churning along a little bit more. This is the second chapter I'm writing, so anybody who's written books know that I've written chapter 1, what I think is chapter 1. This is supposed to be chapter 2, but you never know what happens when you're writing a book like this. Sometimes things morph and change. Things get picked out of one chapter and put in the introduction or put into chapter 4 or whatever it is. So yeah, so we'll see. Right now, chapter 2 is the story of superwash, and it's a pretty interesting story. So I hope I can share it with you guys sometime soon. In the meantime, I hope you're all having fun knitting. And don't forget to check out the classes that are now the online classes that I'm teaching over on YouTube now. You can check them out on the website, knittingthestash.com, and use the code SUMMERSCHOOL to take 15% off if you're interested in jumping into one of those classes. They are asynchronous. You can just do them at your own pace, and you can always email me if you have questions, or there are comments there. You can leave comments, and I will be in the comments to help you out. Yeah. So I hope you're having fun. Have a good summer. Lots of stuff going on around here. So I'm not sure if I'll be able to podcast as often, but when I can get up in the yarn room and spend some time with you all, it's really fun, and I always look forward to it. So take care, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.